is an invitation to adults to pause, observe, and recognize childhood across the 8 areas that matter deeply to children and shape who they become. Play, social bonding, all-round skills, education, creativity, stories, nature, and quiet time. These areas are not programs, but everyday experiences that allow childhood to unfold well. So, without further ado, guiding today's conversation is Deepika Mogli Shetty, who is the Chief of Policy and Partnerships at the EkStep Foundation. Her work focuses on digital public goods, learning infrastructure, and ecosystem partnerships that expand access to education. She brings experience across government, philanthropy, and civil society, and leads initiatives that translate innovation into scalable public impact. We're also joined by a panel working across policy, technology, learning systems, and childhood development. To begin, we have Vedika, who is a public policy specialist at Niti Aayog, working on evidence-based frameworks across education, early childhood, and human development.
Hi, Vedika. Welcome.
Next up, we have Bronson, who is a machine learning researcher and co-founder of the Crane AI Labs, building offline-first AI infrastructure designed for communities with limited connectivity.
Welcome to the panel. Thank you so much for coming.
Next up, we have Pallavi, who is an educator and co-founder of the Nurturant, working closely with parents and young children on early development and play-based learning environments.
Thank you, Pallavi.
Next, we have Aziz, who is the co-founder of Rocket Learning, one of India's largest early childhood development organizations, supporting millions of children through large-scale programs. And last but not the least, we have Adam, who's the global lead for digital policy at LEGO, shaping international policy on online safety, privacy, and protecting children in digital environments.
Please.
With that, let's begin. Deepika, over to you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So for the last 2 days, I have been in this wonderful summit, part of many panels talking about policy, safety, talking about all these very, very complex, scary things. And it comes from 2 very different worlds. One where at some level you see the possibilities with technology. Another level, the other end is a lot of fears around technology. But in the middle, when policy meets people where they are, is where the real impact is possible. And maybe there is some space in the middle where we can actually shape some things. But today's conversation is not about policy, it's not about technology. It's essentially about our ability to engage with what we care about, what we want to hold dear, what we want to let go a little bit of, and what possibilities we can explore together. Yeah. And why this conversation in the middle of this craziness? Mostly because there's a tree. But having said that, what I do want to put on the table, and thank you so much all of you for joining us today, and this is a very diverse panel. We have Pallavi, whose life is, I want to describe the day in Pallavi's life, involves a 15-month-old and a 40-year-old in an 8-hour time period. Correct? I think Adam, on the other hand, while he talks about digital policy, while he talks about AI literacy, he talks about all of that, but play is the center of a lot of the work at LEGO. Without that, the rest of it could be anyone talking about it. Aziz, Rocket needs no introduction in our ecosystem, but what you and the team has done is making it real in India's largest early childhood and care delivery system. Vedika comes, of course, from Niti Aayog, given her work in policy and data and all of those questions, but she also is a young mom. So she wears 2 hats today. Bronson, you're not. Why did somebody tell me that? I'm sorry. Ah, I'm so sorry. Bronson is here all the way from Kenya, Crane AI Labs. The really interesting component of their conversation is about how they feel empowering teachers actually has helped in the early learning space. Childhood is shaped not only by families and classrooms, and it's shaped by systems, platforms, and aspirations that come out of these systems and platforms. And today's conversation is not whether technology will shape childhood, but whether who shapes it, how they shape it, who gets to influence how it's shaped, and for whom. Having said that, each speaker here is actually, we have a little bit of a task to do, and those in the audience also have to do this today. This card is meant for us to look at basically engaging with the 8 elements of childhood. Okay? Each speaker has chosen one element to anchor their lens, and I invite them to actually, shade that lens a little bit with a pen that's there on their. Does everyone have a pen? The task is very simple. Yeah? You'll see segments on the wheel. Each segment is one element of childhood. Take a moment and mark how strong or present you feel with each element. For any child you engage with, it could be a child that's your own, a child you've observed, it could be in the systems that you engage with. Pick anything that you want, mark it as low, medium, high, shade as appropriate using the pens that you have. Essentially, the way to think about it is they're all shaded, but depending on what is more for you or less for you, you can just shade it in any which way you like. Go for it. Okay, let's begin with the panel. Adam, what did you mark for play?
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Okay?
Yeah.
Great. It's probably no surprise, but I marked play as high. I'd mark it very high, super high, if I could. And that's really, the focus of the Lego Group. And what we do is all about building the playmakers of tomorrow and helping children learn through play. And I think the reason why play is such an important aspect of childhood, it's not just an outlet for creativity and imagination, but it is quintessential to building the core capabilities that it takes to be a child.
Can I push you a little bit? Can you take us to a moment, perhaps, where you have seen play truly come alive?
Sure.
Yeah?
Actually, one moment quite recently comes to mind. So the Lego Group supported the UK's Alan Turing Institute to do a study about how generative AI interacts with the well-being of children in classrooms. And that workshop saw us bring some image-generated models to a classroom in Scotland, and then basically say to children, how do you want to use this? How do you want to kind of integrate this into your learning and play styles? But alongside that, we also gave them tactile tools. So, big canvases with crayons and paints.
Like us.
Exactly. And we said, okay, well, do you want to use the AI to create a new image and to kind of bring your imagination to life, or do you want to play with a more tactile art materials that you've had? And maybe not to our surprise, most children actually wanted to play with the art materials and draw and create rather than go through the AI intermedium, because it gave more opportunity for play and interaction and social connection. And rather than them just kind of putting in a prompt and going to the screen, which, some of them did and then found that kind of constructive, they had much more instructive and just more fun when they were all around the table together, playing, creating, and we found that they kind of learned and leaned into the task more because it was more interactive, more tactile. So that was a recent lesson that we've really come down from.
I am so glad about that example, because I think that is something we should hold very dear in our conversation in terms of the instincts we enable when you engage with technology particularly. But thank you for that. That was a brilliant example, actually. Aziz. What did you mark for all-round skills?
So, for all-round skills, and here I did not, I mean, what I marked was what I see in systems rather than where I think they should be.
Yeah.
Right? So,
That's exactly
yeah,
was
so
the
I
right
think
place.
what we see is that, I mean, in Anganwadis and preschools across the country, if you take a broadly average view, we are probably low as far as that goes. I'll take a stab at defining what all-round skills mean to me and their importance, and then Deepika can tell me whether this fits the framework. But fundamentally, I think there's a lot of research and knowledge, both intuitively and learned, that social emotional skills, 21st century skills like resilience, problem solving, social awareness, all of that actually gets built very early on. And in fact, the research shows that this is what sustains till the end of your life, even much more than, say, the education part of the bucket.
Yeah.
Here. Right? So the education actually, there's some research that shows that everybody sort of converges, but the all-round skills are what sustain, and that's what then leads to sort of IQ gains, earning gains, social behaviors, etc. So I think that's super critical. Now, how do you build those early on? I think, I won't quote more data, but in terms of examples, I'll use an example from home. I have a 21-month-old daughter at home, which really has made early childhood development a very live problem and solution for me, and a fun area for me. And I have a nanny who helps me, and the nanny comes from a lot of the communities that we serve. So she's representative of 90% of India's population.
Yeah.
And when I try to talk to as a 3-month-old, I was talking to my 3-month-old when she was 3 months old. And the nanny used to laugh at me and say that what is the kid going to understand? She's just 3 months old. She don't understand anything. So that was one type of thing. One anecdote that stuck in my head. Another is recent because my baby has become very, very clingy now. And so she wants to be around me all the time. And so my nanny has been urging me that you just disappear. We were walking with the baby and you disappear, and then I can carry on with her. Right? Because otherwise she will cry if she sees you go away. And I think as I looked at my own sort of knowledge of early childhood, I thought that both those things are not great behaviors, because not talking to a child is total antithesis of the love talk and play framework that is sort of universal in terms of dealing with young kids. So, and not talking to kids is probably what leads to the 4 million word gap that actually happens between higher and low income kids. On the other side, if I just disappear without telling a kid something, then the message that I'm giving them even when they're adults is that the world is unpredictable. Nobody is going to tell me what to do or stick to it. And that's what leads to behaviors later in terms of people not trusting social contracts or believing what people do or abiding by those sorts of things. So I think those are all examples where what you do early on sticks with people. And so then the behaviors of telling my child that, look, I promise I have to go now, I have to work, but I promise I will be back at so and so time, and then following up on that. That is then what leads to a world where they're able to behave in that way with others, right? Or if I'm talking to a child, then I know that it's not just once a week that I'm doing it. Every behavior that I have, I will be talking to the child. So any long-winded answer, but I think that's where we see that the best examples of our work are not where somebody does one activity in a day, but where this thinking around behaviors and all-round skills and how to build those gets a part of every aspect of the day, right? And that's when teachers and parents tell us that our relationship with the child has fundamentally changed. We are closer to them. That, I think, is what marks success for us, much more than saying, that so many kids can now do reading or math or even more formal measures of social emotional skills.
I actually loved your long winding answer for the very simple reason, aside from that, it just brings your life alive. But I do want to touch upon one point, right? When Adam spoke of the instinct of play, which a lot of kids gravitated to one thing, what you've brought alive is also the fact that what's the dominant narrative in how we as a society think of children and engage with children. And ultimately, that little anecdote that you have mentioned is predominantly the conversation shift that we want to make. And again, that's a very human connection thing, and a very different conversation than understanding why this is a value. It's actually moving into the idea that conversation is actually enriching for the parent and the adult as well, whoever the caregiver is. But thank you for highlighting that, because I feel like it's placing it for us. Pallavi, I know what you care a lot about. Social bonding, huh?
Absolutely.
Can you talk about what you marked, why you marked it, and given your vast experience in a day in and day out of working with children and a lot of worries that you have in the context, particularly of social bonding, can you give us an insight of how it showed up for you?
So when I marked social bonding, I marked it low because that's what I see now, that it's really become a very fragile item, if I may call it that. And that's largely because what I'm seeing every day is that our children are connected, but not really deeply connected to the adult caregiver in the room. Right? Be it parents, be it educators. I don't see that connection really happening. And the whole reason being that this adult in the room is there but not cognitively present most of the time. It's a highly distracted adult that we are finding all around us, right? And this emotional signaling or social bonding, as we call it, that is the foundation, like Aziz also said, for everything. It's why we are uniquely human. It's what ultimately, the learning across the domains starts from that emotional input in early childhood, and that's how we are hardwired to learn across our lifespans. Not just the socio-emotional, but even what makes us truly human, which is the fact that our highest mental ability, which is to think and reflect as humans, that comes from this emotional signaling. And I mark it as fragile because I see that this emotional signaling between the adult and the child is weakening because of this cognitively distracted adult in the room. And a lot of times people tell me that, but they are still learning. They're picking up speech. Look, they even speak with an accent. Yeah, the Peppa Pig generation, I call it. But you see, we're raising, and I'm really curious, if not worried, but I think we're raising a generation of children who are highly informed. They sound very smart because they're so full of data. But are they really reflective? I'm not very sure.
In some ways, I think your point connects very interestingly to Aziz's point. When I like the term cognitively distracted adult. What causes that cognitive distraction is something that we have to probe a little into. And tech perhaps is one of it, but something else is also part of it. So actually, what we're asking for and fighting for is trying to actually bring back the attention of the adult to something very basic and core. Bronson, your turn. What have you marked on education? And I do want to ask you a question. In a classroom, given how you observe these spaces because of your work, can you tell us when learning is really happening? Not in metrics, not in data, but what gives you a sense that learning is really happening?
Yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to mention that for education, I actually marked it as high.
Marked it as high?
Yeah, on my end. But I'm going to put a caveat to that. I think education needs to be both informal and like the formal side of things. But also it needs to be interleaved with a lot of play, I think. Idea behind this for me is that at that stage, I feel like children are like sponges at that very young stage. And a lot of the experiences they get at that age are basically cut through into adulthood. So a lot of the time you find that the skills that you teach at that age are basically the ones that are going to come out in the child. So I think that in the informal side of things, this is where we have the parent-teacher bonding, the parent-child bonding. Raise my voice?
Yes, you need to raise your voice and
Okay,
hold
is
the
this
mic a
better?
little closer to you.
Got it.
Thank you.
So I was saying that in the informal side of things, we're talking about like the parent-child bonding, and then obviously there's the teacher aspect of things. But all the skills that you impart at that particular stage of life are basically going to help this child as they grow up. And so that for me is the reason as to why I feel like the education and most of the experiences I had as a child with my dad, with my mom, those things are what ultimately shaped what I ended up doing. But it wasn't like the sort of education which you have where it's like you're in a classroom and everything's you're being taught this. It's more like someone is actually listening to you and giving you the amount of time to tell you this is this, and you are able to learn and make mistakes along the way. So I feel like that's the sort of education that I advocate for and why I placed it high.
I'm going to bring that back to you, particularly because you build technology. I'm curious to see how you actually bring elements of that into how you design.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can come back to that later, but I just want to put a pin on that to say, let's talk about that. Vedika,
The second question?
that it was connected to how do you know when learning is happening? How do you see it?
So in that particular regard, we think that from our experience, from what we've seen, is that the child is more curious when it comes to something. So for example, you show them, for example, like let's say a picture of an apple, and then you explain to them a story about the apple, and they want to know more. So then that's when you know that, okay, maybe like this child has actually picked up something. And then later you ask them, hey, do you remember that story? And they can actually tell you something about that. So these sorts of the tools that we're trying to build are basically trying to help teachers actually bring up more of this, bring up more of the storytelling, more of the things that the children really care about, as opposed to just trying to teach them everyday things.
I really like that example for the very simple reason that you are actually connecting to the innate idea of curiosity and how you actually surface that and to measure, and that being the measure of learning. I think an interesting thing to look at, and in terms of a design perspective, how does one see curiosity? How does one connect to the idea of curiosity? Is a great challenge to think about when we are designing for the early years. Vedika, I don't know whether you've got the hardest one or the easiest one. I'm going to go with it though. What did you mark for quiet time? Ironic in the middle of where we are sitting, but
I marked it as medium. I mean, if I can draw parallels between two generations. My generation, when I was a child, quiet came very easy to me. You know, when I went to school, we used to go for morning prayers, morning assembly time. Then we used to have 10-15 minutes of just quiet breathing time, and then the classes would start. There would be a storytelling time. There would be reading sessions. Now I see my nieces who are 10 and 6 years old. They are completely in a rat race. You know, schools have subjected them to a complete rigid, structured curriculum. There is no space for, everything is activity oriented. There is no space for a child to just think and reflect and, you know, let your imagination and creativity take control of you know, things. We used to go and observe nature. These things don't happen, especially in the urban areas. You just don't go and observe nature like how we used to do. That is why I think for today's time, it is important, because you need to, I mean, yes, activities are important, structure, routine is important, discipline is important. But what we forget is that you need to let the child take pause so that the creativity, imaginations flourish. Your curiosity will die otherwise. And that is what I see in today's generation. Like my nieces just come and they would tell me, and especially the social media and children being very informed. Yesterday she came and told me that we are going to have to goldfish. Can you look at Google Gemini, AI and tell me what are the cute names for goldfish for girls? And I was like, why don't you think about it? You give me names. I don't want to use the AI, and you should also not use AI. And then they took 30 minutes of their time, both of them discussed something, and then they came back and gave me names. It is very easy for a school or an institution to be driven by performance, enrollment, you know, like enabling the child excel in education. But in today's generation, having that quiet time when a child is reading, just imagining things. You know, how we read Harry Potter, we used to imagine everything. Now everything is on TV. Like when you think about Harry Potter is right there. You know, the actors who have played the characters. I think it is very important.
Thank you so much for that. Now, you thought you guys were going to sit here and do nothing and get away with it. There are 3 more elements, and I am going to request someone from the audience. Does anyone want to tell us how you mark stories? Anybody? Go for it. There's nature and creativity coming up next. Neil, I might pick on you.
Yeah, hi. So I marked stories as high because I'm thinking about my nephews and they really love being read to. And I think that stories help them see themselves in another world. It helps them put themselves in somebody else's shoes. I think there are a few ways in which the language cadence also really kind of builds rhythm for them. So I'm thinking about The Highway Rat, or about some of these books that they really, really enjoy listening to, reading. And what I never realized, I think what storytelling really does too, is that it shows them that a book is something that contains knowledge and that pages can be turned. Because I was reading about this example of a child who was handed a book and tried to swipe on it because they just did not understand what a book is and how it functions. So I think that storytelling through physical paper books, picture books. There's one on Dehradun, The Moon in Dehradun, which is about partition. We're a partition family. And honestly, I never expected that my 6-year-old nephew is going to love that book, but he just deeply enjoys it. So I think storytelling is super important and should absolutely be a part of every child's every day. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. Does anyone want to go for nature? Can I just randomly pick? Okay, Neil, how did you mark nature? The man in the white shirt.
Actually, I will say that I will mark all of them as high, except education.
Is that your aspiration?
That's what I saw my childhood. But nature, I think I missed that part as a high because I grew up in the quite urban area and my school doesn't have that kind of nature connection. But my wife, who has a very strong connection with the village, semi-urban type of school, and she had a very good strong nature connection. The kind of experiences, memories, stories she has with her childhood about the nature, about the flowers and trees and insects, I don't have, and I miss that. I envy her. And I think the nature tells us the empathy. Nature gives us the care.
How do you bring this into your work at Pratham, Neil? How do you see it come alive in the context of Pratham? Do you actively push for that engagement?
I would really like to push nature as a very important element of education. We are trying to bring that part, but I'm not sure if we have brought that in that great extent.
Yeah.
And I think we need to bring that element. How to create that love and passion for nature.
In many ways, I think our attempt at trying to put it like this is to create a lens for us to see the elements we are paying attention to and the ones we are not paying attention to. Because we have enough curriculum frameworks, we have a whole lot of other things that guide how we actually construct our work and what we present to children. But an attempt at playing with it was to frame it in this way so that we develop a little bit of an observation around it. But thank you very much, and I'm going to just move into the next round, if that's okay. One suggestion, if I may, as we go into the next couple of questions, if we can stick to a real-world example, what's working, what's breaking in the context of the question that I'm going to be asking you. And also if you frame it from the lens of what adults often miss, right? But what I want to underscore for everyone here in the audience is in all of this exploration that we did today, did you guys notice how base instinct human elements just came out as what people valued in all of these questions? Vedika, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you. You work in Niti Aayog. Data drives a lot of your work because that's how you see the world move and progress. Of course, there are a lot of programs. But as monitoring systems become more data-driven and algorithmically supported, how do these tools end up shaping what institutions pay attention to about children? What risks being overlooked because it's harder to measure? What are we going to overlook it because we just haven't figured out how to smartly measure something of value?
I think when it comes to policy making, it's a continuous journey. I mean, we started off, with ICDS, which was somewhere in 1975. And at that time, the focus was on 0 to 6. But, recent data is suggesting that 0 to 3 is a very critical window of opportunity where the brain develops way faster than 3 to 6. So now you have to use this data to feed into the policy making and design policies accordingly. So, for example, the recent shifts in the policy is taking cognizance of this data, right? So you have, Saksham Anganwadi Portion 2.0, which is looking at making, Anganwadi centers into a creative play school center. Then you have Portion B Padhai Bhi, which is, rocket learning, very strongly supporting it, where, you're looking at continuously doing capacity building of the frontline workers. You are focusing on zero, you have Adharshila and Navchetna, which are stimulation activity calendars for 0 to 3 and 3 to 6. So policy is continuously changing. And we have made sure that there is a strong backbone of data system which is monitoring everything. So for example, responsive caregiving, home visits, they are being monitored. Nutritional status of the children are being monitored. Capacity building of the frontline workers is getting monitored. Developmental delays and screenings, which was somewhere, it was part of the policy, but somewhere it was falling through the cracks. Now it has again become a very important part of monitoring. But I believe data only presents half of the picture. And it has to come with a development caution. For example, when you're looking at, fine, there is enrollment happening, there is home visits happening, it is being captured through the portion tracker. But what is the quality of the home visit? Whether after that 45 minutes of counseling, are the parents able to interact with the child better? My child may do very well on the learning outcomes, but does it show that the child is being emotionally pressured, or there is a pressure, or there is a competition? The data might not show. Or vice versa, the child might not be doing very well on learning outcomes, but it doesn't show that probably the child is very smart in creativity and imagination. And there are a lot of data where you can see that there is, when you subject a child to a standardized data monitoring system, you are at the risk of leaving out the nuanced individual child's progress. And we need to keep on track with that. And there are ways, for example, just incorporate more qualitative understanding of the child's progress. So, have more observational tools. Try to have some random sampling where you are including a qualitative understanding of the child's progress. What our pilot with rocket learning, Niti Aayog's rocket with pilot learning is also doing that. We are leveraging technology for 0 to 6 years to see the learning outcome, but also helping address the individual child's, giving a more customized approach. So you have to make sure that the data, that the AI and the data systems are not moving towards standardized approach, but helping you develop customized approach for every child.
Thank you so much for actually making that point. I think by connecting the idea of what we find easy to measure to the point of what we are missing and what we actually care about, and then looking at how do we therefore then build systems to actually bring attention to what we care about.
Also measuring the environment.
Also something we care about. The space matters as much as the people, as much as the interaction. And that's a very good connect to the question that I'm going to be asking you, Bronson. And this is, when teachers and educators use AI tools, right? What tells you that the tool is assisting the teacher, assisting their thinking rather than directing their thinking?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And it's something that you have to also think about as you design these systems. I think far too often you might want to just give the teachers a tool that solves everything for them, but that's not the case. So for example, based on what the teacher might want to teach today, our approach is more towards helping them. So for example, generating fun stories, generating analogies, or even places where the child might trip up. Let's say that you're teaching two words and they're similar and you want to have a differentiator between those. So we could quickly help you spin up. And that's some of the work that we've been doing with Fab AI. We think it's more about helping the teacher quickly come up with these clever ways that actually improve learning, for example, the stories and all these other things that we're talking about, as opposed to it being something that is basically telling you, okay, this is the curriculum, this is what you have to have the child learn. And like the learning outcome example, which was basically given. I feel like once you start going down that path, these systems then become constraints in themselves, and the feedback loop is going to be hindered, because the child is also going to be assessed in that particular way, and the teacher is going to go back and is going to ask you, hey, can we improve this based on that particular outcome? So we're very strict in the design of these things, but also I feel like you have to engage the teachers almost as if they're your friends and ask for their own experiences. And what we're looking out for in that particular case is, do they push back on certain things as well? And we're glad to note that in some cases, they'll actually tell you, I feel like this is not something that, it would make sense in my experience as a teacher who has been teaching for 10 years. And we take that into account because we think that's the knowledge that we need to help build these systems.
I have a follow-on question to the idea of bringing, it's very interesting about who is involved in the design. And what tools and what processes do you use to actually keep them continuously involved in the design? Because it's very easy to do it once, and you've actually built something around feedback that you've got once. But in a world in which our tools are actually shaping so rapidly, what frameworks are you using to ensure that this is a continuous co-creation process, if at all it is? Are there some ideas you have in that?
Yeah, so we're very personal with that particular phase. So we have someone who actually reaches out to them and actually talks to them on a regular basis. And we think that's the best way for you to get, it's not the fastest way, obviously.
Yeah.
There are better ways for you to maybe do this, but the most important thing for us is the fact that the teacher is telling you, okay, we use this, and I was able to have because I think just to paint a context for how it is in Uganda, where I come from, and also what we're doing, also expanding over to Kenya and all of these other countries, the teacher-to-student ratio in some cases is 1 to 75 or 1 to 200, especially when you go more towards the rural areas. So that means that these teachers basically do not have as much time to come up with all of these different things, but also cater to the children one-on-one and give them that sort of attention that they need. So every single second that they can basically save is very crucial, because that means that they spend more time with the children.
The child.
And so we can't take that away. We think that that's really important, and that's the reason as to why we have those one-on-one interactions. They tell us those sorts of stories. We also pick up some things that they might not tell us, and we just go back and we're like, okay, I think what he's trying to say is he also wants something that might generate an analogy or something of that sort. So it's very human oriented, and we think some of these things, as much as we're pushing so much for AI systems, some of them should not be optimized to that level.
Yeah, that's a good point you're making, and it's a great segue into Pallavi. Have you noticed moments where digital or AI-driven tool changes how parents interpret their child's behavior for better or worse?
Yes, of course. Parents are increasingly moving towards the internet, AI or otherwise, to interpret everything about their children. And so the way I look at it is that for parents and educators, AI tools make them feel less alone. Okay, so because AI gives you the language, and AI gives you the reassurance, right? It always knows the right thing to say at the right time. It gives you that. But what it takes away is that it takes away your attention from the child right in front of you, and moves towards interpretation by a system, right? And that makes me wonder whether, when we start trusting the system so much over our own observational skill, because that's something that innately all of us know. We know how to feel and we know how to see. And if we're now outsourcing that interpretation to a system, I wonder whether as an adult I am weakening my own observational muscle. Because we've been talking about it that a 15-month-old does not learn because an adult is sitting there and lecturing him or teaching him in any way. A 15-month-old learns because of the playful back and forth, the rhythm of playful back and forth interaction that happens between an adult and a child, right? The child is watching how your eyes light up, whether your eyes even light up when the child enters the room. The child is watching your pauses, is trying to even think what that pause even means. Watching your body language, whether you're tensing up, whether you're hurried, whether you're distracted. And that emotional signaling, that is the foundation, like I mentioned earlier, to reflective thinking. So when an adult's nervous system is really regulated, that is what helps the child regulate and therefore go on to become a thinking, reflecting adult. So if I'm outsourcing interpretation and like he said, right, I mean, I think as an educator, I can say this, that the most profound learning moments happen which cannot even be distilled into any system. It's immeasurable, right? And only an attuned adult who's actually observing will know how to use that to the child's advantage. And the system cannot tell you that.
How does this show up in your life when a parent is actually engaging with the system and bringing that to you? Because you're also observing the same child.
Yep.
Right? How do you reconcile the way that they're observing based on something a system has said and how you're observing? But as in, it's creating a bit of a conflict in your life. How do you engage with that problem?
You just have to keep talking, I think, both to the child and to the adult. There is no other way. When you keep talking, when you keep engaging, and when you keep showing with not data, but when you keep showing with the experiences, the learning moments, the nuances of it all, that's when it's like an aha moment. Someday there is that aha moment, and they're like, oh my God, like, yeah, I did see that. And I'm like, yeah. That's what. So
basically then reinforcing the adult's ability to see.
Absolutely.
With all their eyes and ears and touch and feel and perhaps even taste in some way is what we're talking about. Thank you for that. Adam, I'm going to come to you later, Aziz. Adam, where have you seen digital or intelligent tools genuinely expand children's curiosity? And where have you noticed that they have unintentionally shrunk them?
Just so I have the question clear, where have you seen tools expand curiosity and the opposite too? And the opposite.
Where have you seen tools unintentionally shrink it?
Yeah. So alongside UNICEF, we supported a project called Responsible Innovation and Technology with Children, which basically explored how digital technologies, specifically video games, the impact they have on child well-being. And one core aspect of child well-being was creativity. So that framework basically said, if you design a digital game or a digital interface in this way, what is the measurable impact on the creativity of a child? And it looked at a few different games, including some Lego games, and made some assessments. And this was a project that was, children, like 300 children from around the world in multiple different countries, very diverse audiences. And the conclusion was that there's some specific design interventions you can make which have a real tangible impact on creativity. So one is open-endedness. It is creating a game where you don't really have such a linear path. So, player goes from A to B point, actually empowering the child to explore the world, have multiple different solutions to reach some kind of outcome. That measured very highly on creativity. Another one was also kind of co-creation and content creation. So where you have games that have an element of user-generated content, which is increasingly common now. So like Roblox has a lot of these things. And for whatever other concerns there might be on those platforms, when you give kids those types of tools, that has a real tangible outcome on creativity. And we're seeing how AI can enable that. I think the most important thing from my mind is before we kind of unleash these tools on children and give them the power to create, we've really got the privacy and safety points designed better first. Because it's clear that when done right, these types of interfaces can have a positive impact on creativity. But if you want to actually embed that, you've got to get the privacy and safety fundamentals, create kind of a safe environment so then children can be, have the freedom to explore within it and freedom to create within it. And that brings me to the kind of the second point of where we've seen it kind of close down creativity. I think one thing we're seeing in AI interfaces and chatbot interfaces in an educational setting is it's, you have a question, you have an answer, the child says, tell me about the founding fathers in 1776, this, and write the essay for me. That it's kind of just rote learning. It's not engaging the critical faculties to actually understand how to structure an essay, understand how to create a persuasive argument, which is a form of creativity and learning, right? Actually designing your response rather than just downloading it and getting it.
Understood.
So I think we're quite concerned with the impact on critical faculties that some AI interfaces can have, and creativity is a part of forming a cohesive and persuasive response in education.
I think particularly because we actually work and our conversation is about the first 8 years of childhood and it's young children. So I'm actually taking what Adam is saying and wondering whether those principles actually are valuable for the caring adults for whom we're actually building systems. Things like open-endedness to innately generate curiosity amongst the caring adult. Is there principles that are emerging from this conversation for how you might think of embedding the core elements of childhood in the way that you build systems for caring adults around childhood? There's something like that that's kind of emerging in the way that Adam framed this response. Aziz, let's get real about India. I think it's great to talk about tooling when everything is there, available and accessible. But in the context of India, we have a big gift, which is the world's biggest early childhood care and education system. Yeah. My question to you is, working closely with Anganwadi workers and teachers, what is something they notice about children of families that systems or dashboards don't see?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are hundreds, if not thousands of things of that sort, right? And honestly, systems are not even meant or don't even need to necessarily capture that data. I think what they can do is to help the Anganwadi worker or the parent be able to record and use that data better from their own viewpoint. So I'll give an example. I was at an Anganwadi visit recently near Indore, and we've been building this AI assistant for the Anganwadi educator to help them craft lesson plans, in a more effective way for children and reduce some of the cognitive load and time pressure and all of that. Now, in that scenario, we were just trying to test, and I asked the Anganwadi worker that our kids, have you seen situations where a kid is good at one thing but bad at one thing, and how would you like to store that data, for example? And they said that, yes, for example, this kid is very, very active, good in everything, but really bad at coloring because they don't like stickiness. So they feel their hands get really icky when they try to paint. Right? So, the kid is not doesn't mean the kid is bad at drawing per se, or doesn't have the creativity to know what to draw or desire to draw, but they find it icky. and so maybe the way to deal with it is very, very different, right? And so you're never going to have a data-backed system, right, which is going to store like this data point. Similarly, like kids may not be socially very accepting at a particular point because that's just a stage of life where they're a little bit withdrawn. And then later, as they sort of grow older, naturally they may fall out of that withdrawn stage, but that doesn't mean that the child should be marked up as saying doesn't have social skills. Maybe it is about sort of a phase where they are, and that's something that will organically happen, or maybe you can be coached out of, right? So I think the point that I'm making is that there will be a lot of data points. I think our design principles, when we've thought about sort of how to support educators, whether the caring adult, right, whether it's the educator or the parent, is that don't use data to sort of monitor them to death, right? Because you can have an AI sensor in every classroom that talks about sort of, this is what they did, this is what they didn't do, improve attendance. And often I say, you'll have all this data and so what, right? Like if parents want to do something, they will. If educators come or not in complex public system like India, you will know somebody's not coming and you can't do anything about it, right? So please don't take the joy out of it by monitoring them to death. Help them make it more fun. Secondly, don't have AI which is going to replace the teacher who has all these data points by an AI which is automatically going to talk to kids, because that just doesn't work, especially for young kids up to the age of 6, right? So I think these are these examples are examples of some of the data points that are there. There are many of them. What you should do and can do is that the teacher knows this but doesn't have the ability to sort of record it easily and then have maybe suggestions on, okay, like a week, I noticed this today, like 2 weeks later, this is an activity I'm supposed to do. This will not work as it is in the curricula for this kid because of this information that I had. Now, will the system itself tell me that, you had this information? You could enter this very simply, like just by dictating it into a phone, for example. And then it tells me that, you told me that the kid finds things icky. So this is how you can do today's coloring activity with the kid. So that is what is valuable in terms of helping them capture the data signals and the adaptation, rather than forcing them to show hundreds of points, which they will then never relook at ever again.
That's a incredibly interesting point and a very important point in the context of way we've been looking at technology and what we talk about at EkStep, particularly on diffusion of AI. We said it has to be agency enhancing rather than non-extractive. It can't be that in this new world, every human being becomes an extractor of data like a miner and starts to provide, it's a new kind of exploitative labor almost at this point, because you are now the vehicle through which a system becomes more intelligent. But I'm really glad you brought that point. But let's just make it even more real to say, what? We are talking about women in this country and a system which for the last 50 years has been the most reliable care and growth system unparalleled in the world. Yeah? And it's been 50 years. And it's a moment that perhaps came and went without a lot of notice in India. Highly unfortunate, but no attempts at trying to make it seem like the shining light of anything worked for us. But we do have a little bit of a film which the Rocket team, along with their partners, has worked on. And we just want to show it to you and play it for you. And Aziz, after it's played, you can tell us a little bit about it. But more than anything else, before they play it, everyone in the audience, there's a bookmark. On the bookmark is a QR code, which if you scan, you'll see the longer length of the film. What you're getting to see is perhaps the 2-minute version or the 5-minute version, I'm not sure which one. But please. Why is it not on?
हम बच्चों को ऐसा इतना अच्छा नहीं पढ़ा पाते थे, लेकिन ग्रुप में जब जुड़े तो मतलब फिर हमको ये लगा कि मतलब बच्चे को हमें ये करवाना ही करवाना है. मतलब हमारा बच्चा भी बहुत एक्टिव हो गया पहले इतना एक्टिव नहीं था, अब बहुत एक्टिव है. तो बहुत कुछ बच्चों ने सीखा मैम, और मेरी बच्ची तो मैम बहुत कुछ सीख चुकी है अब तक.
मुझे लगता है मेरी भी जानकारी ज़्यादा बढ़ी है और बच्चों की भी इसी के माध्यम से ज़्यादा जानकारी बढ़ती जा रही है अभी, कि पहले के मुकाबले में भी जैसे इन्हें बहुत सहायता मिल जाती है. पहले क्या है कि बुआ सिखाती थी और नहीं भी सीखते थे, तो अभी जैसे एक्टिविटी चालू हो रही है इसमें मोबाइल के इस ऐप्स के द्वारा, तो बच्चों को भी काफ़ी कुछ सीखने को मिल जाता है इसके द्वारा में.
ahead.
Yeah, I think thanks to Deepika and the EkStep team for showing the snippet. And there's a whole 20-minute video where this comes from. And I think in that video, we are trying to showcase the lives and realities of these roughly 2.6 million women, right, who are running the system. And this is the size of the Indian Railways and Army put together, but I think barely thought of or considered. And I think this is the segment that we are saying, can we, instead of replacing them, augment them, right? Support them, build their agency, and bring more joy into their lives using technology. I think, again, one thing that I do want to say, right? And once you see the video, it'll be clearer. I think the snippet, it's not as clear. But the idea is to use technology and AI to trigger real world action and play. Right? And I think that is where technology will come in. So these are not child facing digital things that children watch and they are supposed to learn, because that's not how learning happens, especially when you are young. So I would argue probably at any age. But it is meant to help the adult, the Anganwadi worker and the parent get ideas and guidance and habit building motivation on what they can do. That's the work we do. But even more important than the work, I think, is to center ourselves. In fact, again, when we talk to Deepika and our partners at the agency fund who actually made this documentary, I think the idea was there is so much talk about AI, but at this summit, but relatively very little talk of the humans who are at the center of social development.
Yeah.
And how can AI actually sort of, how do you have that layer enabled by AI, and how can we talk about that layer? So I'll encourage you all to spend 20 minutes sometime later going through that.
I actually want to second that point, I think, and I want to connect to something that Pallavi is extremely passionate about as well. If the system needs to actually take care of the things that we want to care about, the future, it is about investing in the people who make this happen. The preschool educator, the Anganwadi worker, and it's about enforcing, reinforcing and supporting them in as many ways as one can. And perhaps one principle, if I were to take away from this panel's conversation, is nothing which adds more burden, but something which enhances is the only kind of solution building that one needs to be able to support. And the reason I bring Pallavi back into this conversation is partly because you worry. You worry about the role of technology in the adult's life, and you worry about the role of technology in the child's life. You worry about both. And the question for you is, it's linked to, in the Anganwadi system, there is an adult who has to trust the input they are getting, use that with their instinct to deliver something for a child. How do you know what to trust in this world? And particularly, this flows into the parent as well. I mean, it's any caring adult. Yeah, how do you know what to trust? How do you trust your own judgment versus what the tool or app is suggesting? That's the stuff you worry about. Can we put that very real thing in the center of this conversation?
You're right, Deepika. I mean, we collectively worry what technology is doing to children. But I think the deeper question that we all need to ask ourselves is that, what is it really doing to the adult's nervous system, right? And therefore to childhood. Because childhood is not just something for the child to experience. It is for the adult to experience that childhood alongside the child. And we're unable to do that now, right? I keep saying this, that what makes us uniquely human is not our opposable thumbs. It's our ability to reflectively think. That is what a human being is all about, and differentiates us from all other species on this planet. And unfortunately, that is not hardwired into our genes. That is a highly mediated, learned skill that is acquired through these human interactions, especially adult to child, right? And that is at what took millions of years to evolve, is seemingly at risk today, because we're forgetting this human interaction, or the quality of these human interactions are kind of deteriorating, right? So, if I were to just reframe everything that we've spoken today on this panel from the lens of a child, be it a 6-month-old, a 6-year-old, or even a 16-year-old, I think for us as parents, educators, tech companies, and the people who are the decision makers who are allowing technology to enter into our homes and our classrooms, I think the child just wants us to pause and ask ourselves one question each time we're about to make a decision, is that, will this technology help me find that adult presence that I need for my thinking to even emerge? Or am I and my childhood, is that just going to be another data point for you? I think that's what it is.
Adam, I'm going to bring it to you. Connected to that, if children are growing up in environments shaped by intelligent systems, what does that mean for the world? And for us as adults shaping it? Because, let's be real, we're all in this game. Directly, indirectly, somehow we're in this game. What will have to change and what must remain the same? I think the more important question for me is, what do we want to protect? What do we want to hold on to? What needs to change and what needs to remain the same? I'll frame it again for you. If children are growing up in environments shaped by intelligent systems, what does it mean for adults who are shaping it? What needs to change and what needs to remain the same?
So I think the answer to that is it depends on the systems and how they're designed. I think at the moment, I'm quite concerned about what it means to everyone that children are growing up or will be growing up in a world shaped by intelligent systems, because we have not learned the lessons yet from social media that you can't just release these products and then patch them up later to ensure that they're safe and appropriate for children. They need to be designed intentionally in the lab, in the product studio, before a company releases them. And it's not sufficient that children are, the better test market for these products. You can't experiment with childhood in this kind of way. Now, if we were able to get it right and ensure that there was age-appropriate design for autonomous and intelligent systems, that was informed by pedagogical practice, that was informed by child psychology, then I have a lot of hope. And I think it means that children will be equipped to navigate the world and build upon the knowledge that we've kind of set for them in a much more efficient way. And by that I mean, you can imagine a intelligent system which wasn't extracting data, which wasn't exploitative, but was there to augment, existing paths of learning and existing paths of creativity, so they can basically build upon what was already done to kind of reach new heights. So it can unlock, I think, a real great wave of innovation, but only if it's done in an age-appropriate way initially.
I want to ask that question in a world that's fast changing and there is so much building happening. I don't think we have enough pause to actually, because it's so easy to build now. So the question I have is, then how then do you actually diffuse this learning and experience and knowledge, or how best to do it in a way that Uganda is able to do it well at the same time as India is able to do it, as anyone else who may have spent a lot of time and has the knowledge and who has thought this through. So you don't actually have to make the mistakes because you don't have the luxury to correct this later. So my question, therefore, Adam, is there a body of knowledge that we can create as people who care about this and have an emergent point of view in terms of as technology develops in a more practical way? I think we've exhausted the principles. We have enough policy documents and intent documents and guideline documents telling us about the principles. But I'm going out on a limb here on this panel, given the diversity we have here. Is there space to collaborate on how to in low resource environments, how do you bring these great principles in and in a practical way create best practices for build?
I mean, I might shamelessly plug a Lego
Go for
product
it.
there because that was too good an opening to resist. Lego Education, which is the education arm of the Lego Group, has just built an AI literacy tool. So it's a computer science AI literacy tool, which is designed to roll out, in markets internationally. But it's built on that core principle that I just expressed. It's you need to get it right, understand what children's needs, what's age appropriate at the product design stage before rolling it out. And it seeks to tackle the fundamental question that I think is common across everywhere where children are creating AI. It's first they need to understand the systems. They need to understand what this technology is, how they're being subjected to it, and then given the skills to actually create and drive its development. Because what we don't want to see is a world where children are kind of, they are the subjects of AI, they're passive voices.
Yeah.
AI is happening to them rather than them being key in its development. And that starts with AI literacy. So that's why we've focused on actually developing AI literacy tools to give them that
For
empowerment.
kids as early as 3 and 4.
Kids as early as 3 all the way to 12. And I think AI literacy needs to be a core part of every curriculum, and there needs to be the right tools to do it. So apologies for plugging a product, but I think identifying that critical need is why we
I have
came
to
up with
admit,
it.
I hadn't thought that I was creating a framing for the plug, but that's where it landed, and I'm not complaining for the simple reason that at least it gives us something to work with in terms of principles of thinking. I mean, or at least practical ways of thinking about it. Vedika, I know we've talked about data and we've talked about systems and we talked about a lot of stuff, and particularly in the world in which you live. What is one decision about children that should never be left to a system alone?
Any decision.
No matter how advanced it becomes.
It's a very difficult question. I mean, cannot give a very blanket answer, but what can come to my mind right now is that I think when we are designing policies for children or for adults, especially for children, I think the system should avoid labeling a child in terms of defining their development trajectory, defining whether they are school ready or they are developmentally delayed. I have 2 nieces. I can see from 0 to 6 their development has not been linear. And from what I see in schools these days, especially in the urban schools, the moment the child enters the school, they're subjected to multiple assessments. And by day 1, they are already labeled under different categories. I mean, I don't know if it is a US system that we are following or what, but give the child some space. Let them grow. Cannot label them as, not school ready, not exposed to language, not able to speak, socially awkward, ADHD. I hear all of these things. And while they are important, I'm not discrediting it. You need to leverage technology to see repeated absenteeism, whether the development screening is happening or not, whether the ECD days are happening or not, home counseling is happening or not, whether they are nutritionally at risk or not. They are very important, and it can trigger actions like having more home counseling, taking care of Sam and Mam children, better responsive caregiving. But it cannot take away the human element of this entire development system. You have to enable the child to not only survive but also thrive. You have to put the child in an ecosystem where they are being nurtured for holistic development. And please don't say by year 2 they should be doing this. Give that child space, give the child love, and give the child care. I think that is very important. Technology should be used to give a supportive environment to the children from the frontline workers, from the teachers, from parents, from the community at large. But yes, ultimately, labeling them under different categories is something that we should not let the system alone to do.
What I love about this thing is I like how core instinct of what we value as humans has just come out on this panel. No matter how deeply embedded we are in building tech or thinking about tech. Thank you for that. Bronson, we're talking about children growing up in intelligent systems. Given this reality, what is the one human quality you believe technology never tries to optimize in children? Because I live in a world where there's a lot of questions and conversations about optimizing all the time. But what do you not want to optimize in children?
I think, and this is the reason as to why, even with the work that we're doing with Fab AI, we focus a lot more on the teachers. The one thing that you do not want to do is design systems that in any way stop the child from making mistakes of their own and learning from those mistakes. So, for example, like the labeling idea that was given, if we look at AI and the way we use it right now, and even the reason as to why I guess it's kind of a whole debate right now is because it's not being used as a way to help me think about something. It's used as a way to solve this problem for me. It's not so much that someone is giving it their thesis and they're trying to think through something in some cases. It's that write for me my own entire thesis and then I appreciate it. So the ability for us to make mistakes and the ability for us to then grow up and learn that, okay, this is something that I did. We don't think that systems should be able to mark that. And we think that even when you do introduce these assessment and feedback systems, I don't think it should be a system that delivers that. I feel like it should be a human being, and even the human being is able to deliver it with nuance and still take back some feedback and understand a way to help that child pivot away from whatever it is that they might be seeing that's wrong. Far too often we find that in these low resource settings, for example, in Africa and many other countries, you find that you might even in some cases need to tell this child something in the local language, the one that they're used to, for them to really understand something. And these AI systems are not really good at that. We actually had a whole report where we were trying to show, okay, how good are these systems at speaking our own languages? And we found that from English, which is about 80%, all the way down to our own language in Uganda, which went all the way down to like 40%. So you can see that discrepancy in language and even culture. That, for example, the examples that you can't talk about ice skating in Africa. You know, you are setting up that child for basically for failure because they have never seen this. They can't even imagine ice skating. But this is what the system might, test that child on. So the ability to have that nuanced feedback that's culturally grounded and sometimes even pivot away from what the system might recommend and use other methods to get an idea across, that whole feedback loop should never be optimized.
I feel like we've picked up a lot of principles on the 3 questions that we've given to each panelist today. Perhaps that itself is a manifesto of a sort that could go out into the world. And Aziz, last question for you, and I know Adam needs to rush. And if in the middle of it he runs. Because he has... Okay, go for it. Thank you so much, Adam, for joining us. He has a sudden meeting which requires him to be present somewhere else. Aziz, what do you think Anganwadis and Anganwadi workers particularly, teachers also maybe, need to be trusted with? What should we hold dear in that trust, right? It's very important. And what should they be trusted with and not replaced by? If we can nuance that question. I know we talk about not replacing the individual, but I'm also pushing our thinking a little bit to say it's not just replacing the individual, but what is it about that you trust them with and value in that individual that we want to protect even as we create a world of intelligent systems around them? Because I'll tell you why this is an important question. If we don't build that narrative of trust on this, systems will actually deplete the trust.
That's flipped the question from what you had told me earlier, and so I had to think. No, but I think what we need to figure out with them is to trust them to understand how to run their classrooms and interactions in the way that makes sense within their constraints and situation. So I mean that's a broad statement, but I'll try to contextualize it a bit more. Theoretically, I can try to use the digital ecosystem to, if there are 20 children in a classroom, to ask them to fill in 20 data points every day, and also to get highly personalized 20 lesson plans again every day. Now, when we started building with Anganwadi workers, and we did a lot of workshops with them and a lot of interviews and tried to understand what they want, I think what we heard was that, look, typically I can maybe run like 2 types of groups of children, and if I want to do one-on-one time, I will probably do it every day with 1 or 2 children at max. Right? So that is the constraint that I have in the time that I have and the other stuff that I'm supposed to do. No, so whatever digital tools we have to recognize that reality and give them the flexibility to decide. Somebody else may say, I can actually do one-on-one stuff with 5 different people. But I think forcing them, just because you have the ability to now enable them to enter data or to send them information, which is not attuned to the real constraint they face, is a recipe for disaster. In the sense of, I mean, most likely they will not follow it whatsoever, right? And then your AI will never get adopted, or your digital will not get adopted. So I think that's the answer for me, that you have to trust them to do what is most possible, but then enable them to do that in the best way possible.
Pallavi, connected to this question, for a teacher, what lands as burden and what lands as empowerment?
I think I agree with what Aziz says. The more you force them to just fill in the data, that starts looking as burden. You know, when you're not trusting them with what we just spoke about, that what is innate to all of us. We all know how to see, we all know how to feel. And when we start taking that away from teachers, we give them a whole lot of tools which just end up being one more work, one more thing for the teacher to do. You know, this reporting and that daily report and this parent communication and that and lesson plan and activities and more activities and work cycles. We don't need that. All we want is to tell the teacher that, look, if you're doing this, this is the real reason, right? So don't look at a learning outcome strictly from a theoretical book language perspective. Trust your own intrinsic judgment to say, oh, the child is learning and the child is not falling behind. So, of course, it requires a lot of back and forth, again, a lot of human interaction, human to human interaction, to say, I trust what you're seeing and I see that. Also, I think what has really worked with teachers is when you make them reflect on their own classroom, right? We use a lot of video reflections when we train teachers. So live footage from the classroom, when they watch it back, when they go back, and they themselves are like, oh my God, I missed that. And I wish I had seen that, or I wish I had responded in this way. And a lot of times, most teachers have told me, I wish I had not responded at all. So it's that you want teachers to start seeing that, you know, what we say as educators, as researchers. When they start seeing the power of their own work and what it does to a child, that's when the overwhelm comes down and they really believe that what I'm doing in the classroom matters. I think that's what we want.
I have one question for all of you. In this mad, mad world where AI is taking over how we think and breathe, anyone can take this, and maybe it's for each one of you to answer it. What of childhood would you want to protect?
It's a very difficult question. I think the feeling of safety for a child, the feeling of safety that whatever the child is doing, they will not be penalized for it. There is a space, there is a safety and security that they have been given that ecosystem where they can create, they can do mistakes, but also have a lot of creativity and imagination. I think that is very important, and one kind of tends to forget in this mad world that we live in. It's becoming very competitive. You know, a 2-year-old child I see a 2-year-old child going for handwriting classes. Doesn't make sense to me. But yes, I think it is okay for a child to live with the fact that it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to fail, and every child is special, every child is different. and they will follow their own development path. And what has to happen will happen. Every child will reach where they have to reach.
Safety and trust.
I think what I would like to protect is actually the social bonds, especially now that we have these systems and we can't just take them back. You find that adults are gravitating more towards them, but I sort of wonder, has there been a study that's been done on children who have grown up with these systems as well? I fear that they might, instead of having friends like we used to and going out and going into nature and doing all these sorts of things, they find themselves actually talking more to. Yeah, so I was saying that so these children, we know that the adults are already addicted to, in some cases addicted to these personal assistants, but I really wonder what that does to a child if they're growing up with them. I fear that they will not grow up with the same friends that we had, which is basically like your 2 or 3 people in the neighborhood where you used to meet up regularly, go and maybe go into nature and do things together, make mistakes and learn. Instead, you're going to basically have this personal assistant who's sandboxing you from the world and basically reinforcing a lot of the things that you might have already being going on in your own mind. So I feel like to some extent we need to introduce these systems, but we need to be very explicit and to some case even cut back as to how far the child is allowed to interact with these systems. If it goes to the point where your child is basically interacting and asking this system for guidance as opposed to you as a parent, I feel like that's where we have already made the biggest mistake.
Thank you. Pallavi, I'm going to change it for you slightly. What of childhood would you like to protect for the adult?
Like I said, childhood is not just for the child, it's for the adult to experience it alongside the child. And I'll tell you what I grew up with, right? Like, I had a grandfather whose eyes would light up no matter what I did, right? It was a wrong, right, whatever. I could never be imperfect in his eyes. I was like the grandchild. So I want that for every child, but I want that for every adult. That when that child walks into the room, you should feel that for that child. And in every space, not just at home, in the classroom. Like, I have had teachers, I still remember my KG teachers because they made me feel that. They made me feel like a star. And I want that for every adult, I want that for every child.
Aziz.
What a beautiful evocative statement. So I think we should close with that, but I'll build on what both of you have said. And I think for me, I mean, if I make it a little bit much more drier and much more sort of mathematical, I think the quality and quantity of in-person human interactions, whether those are child-child or child-adult, that is something that should keep going up with every generation rather than less. And then that will... That's what Bronson basically said, and that's what you said, that I think if we allow for that, then we'll have this amazing experience between a child and a parent that leads to lifelong security and love.
What a beautiful set of answers. I think, I'm reiterating a point that's constantly coming back to me. I think this conversation is about what we value as humans, even as we build technology. And perhaps we have a lot of that here today. And I love that if this is the mindset of the major builders of tech, then we may be a little bit in good hands. But more importantly, I think we all have to hold each other to account on this. Because, and therein lies the magic, right? To hold each other to this promise of, if this is what I value, then how do you make it the most thing that everybody values? How do you change the aspiration of what should be valued? And that really is the task at hand for us. And thank you very much for being with us today. This has been a lovely conversation in the middle of what, perhaps an unlikely conversation in the middle of this technology summit, as it were. But I want to say 2 things, just bring your attention to a couple of things. At EkStep and particularly Bachpan Manao, we work with a large ecosystem and several, every one of you are part of that ecosystem as well. And one of the things that we did this past year was to actually capture 4,000 voices of children as they created their manifesto for play from across the country. And out there is a snapshot of what that is. Please do take a look. I think we spent a lot of time on this panel listening to the voice of adults and what they care about. And we felt it would be nice for people to actually hear or at least see or read what children care about. On the same, while we didn't put children on the panel, they're just there as well. They're not a forgotten voice in this conversation. Please do engage with that. Thank you so much for being here today. We're going to play 2 videos again, a slightly longer version of the Rocket and Agency Fund film, and then one other message, which is a fun song, which we believe actually captures the essence of what children want to tell us today. Okay? Yeah?
So 5 years ago, when the new education policy came out, it said that education begins at 3, which was such a powerful sort of statement. And they said actually that early childhood education is the most powerful equalizer. This Anganwadi worker, who is known as the porridge lady, who has no formal training in education, but she has this huge drive, this burning passion to be educating the children in her care. How can we help her be an educator without making it even more burdensome? You know, there is this huge potential of the system, but it also has fundamental challenges, right? So the Anganwadi worker is responsible for the health, the vaccines, the nutrition of these children, of pregnant and lactating mothers. Almost any social security scheme that's supposed to reach people in the village will come eventually through that Anganwadi worker. So she becomes this focal point for almost all the government infrastructure in the village.
Oh, yeah.
अगर हम सब एक हो जाए तो शायद कुछ और बेटर हमारे लिए हो सकता है. लेकिन वही है, लेडीज है, घर की जिम्मेदारियां इतनी है कि हम कभी एक साथ चल नहीं पाते. किसी के हस्बैंड रोक रहे हैं, किसी का बच्चा है, किसी का कुछ है, तो प्रॉब्लम हम लोगों के सामने हमेशा कहते हैं जब से ये दुनिया बनी होगी तब से औरत के सामने परेशानियां तो हैं. लेकिन इस बात की हमें खुशी होती है कि हम वो जिम्मेदारी निभा रहे हैं जो शायद कोई जेंट्स नहीं कर पाएगा. उसको दूध तो पिलाओ अपना. 2 साल के बाद अगर ज़्यादा पीता तो और अच्छी बात है, लेकिन 2 साल तक तो कंटिन्यू. हाँ, और ऊपर की चीज़ जैसे एक दिन मीठा खा रहा है, दूसरे दिन नमकीन, ऐसे. पहले तो जब ज़्यादा थक जाते हैं तो गुस्सा भी आता है. जब बहुत ज़्यादा परेशान हो जाते हैं चारों तरफ से, दोनों काम बढ़ गया हमारे लिए. लेकिन जब सब लोग पहचान जाते हैं, जब कहीं से निकलो तो फिर वो थकान भी दूर हो जाती है. पहले तो थकान होती है, लेकिन जब कोई कहता ना हाँ मैडम जा रही है या बहू जा रही है, हमारी बहू ये काम करती है, तो कोई तारीफ करता है तो थकान भी दूर हो जाती है. तुमको कम आस नहीं लगी है?
हम बच्चों को ऐसा इतना अच्छा नहीं पढ़ा पाते थे, लेकिन ग्रुप में जब जुड़े तो मतलब फिर हमको ये लगा कि मतलब बच्चे को हमें ये करवाना ही करवाना है. मतलब हमारा बच्चा भी बहुत एक्टिव हो गया पहले से. पहले इतना एक्टिव नहीं था, अब बहुत एक्टिव है. तो बहुत कुछ बच्चों ने सीखा मैम, और मेरी बच्ची तो मैम बहुत कुछ सीख चुकी है अब तक.
You know, looked at the child's life. They're spending time in the Anganwadi classroom and they're spending time at home. we knew that these are the two most powerful agents in a child's life. The question was, how do we build agency and habits for this person to be able to do what's best for the child? How do we bring the best science of early childhood development? We have WhatsApp groups. On those groups of Anganwadi workers, we send bite-sized, simple, play-based learning content. So it's 2 videos that go out to the Anganwadi worker every day in the evening, and she uses them to prepare for what she is going to do in the classroom tomorrow. Follows a pretty simple template to help people, get comfortable with the way that they're going to see the content. We have an expert talking about why this activity is important. Then we have a demo where we actually show an Anganwadi center and children learning in that center. And then we end with a call to action asking the Anganwadi workers to actually do the content with the kids in their care as well.
I would encourage all of us to take a look at the film when you have time. It's 20 minutes long. One of the main reasons I think it's very important that we pay attention to it is, aside from the fact that it is a very large women workforce, which doesn't get the attention it deserves, if one has to create an aspirational narrative around it, then we must all actually invest in that. So there is this big question of what we choose to invest in when we choose to invest in childhood. Perhaps time and connection is the message that this panel has given. And with that, here's something fun to engage with.
जल्दी ना करो, अरे टेंशन ना लो, वेट 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 वेट, फ्लो में है हम सेट, थोड़ा चिल कर लो, प्लीज वेट। कभी दौड़ेंगे, कभी रुक जाएंगे, कभी ढूंढेंगे, कभी खो जाएंगे, कभी रूठेंगे, कभी खिल जाएंगे, कभी लड़ पड़ेंगे, कभी जुड़ जाएंगे, कभी उलझेंगे, कभी सुल जाएंगे, कभी हारेंगे, कभी जीत जाएंगे। यही है बचपन का नन्हे, क्योंकि बचपन इसलिए हमें रहने दो, पूरा पीने दो, खोलो बचपन की सबकी, थोड़ा चिल कर लो प्लीज, क्योंकि बचपन इसलिए, थोड़ा चिल कर लो प्लीज, क्योंकि बचपन इसलिए। मम्मी दादा दादी नाना नानी भैया दीदी कजन्स कॉलोनी टॉमी रानी गर्मी ठंडी खेल कहानी सबने अपने पेड़ पहाड़ खाना गाना लेटर्स नंबर्स दुनिया हमारी फुल प्लेट क्योंकि बचपन इसलिए यही ठीक है, यही सीख है, बचपन ही मेरी स्लेट, थोड़ा चिल कर लो प्लीज, क्योंकि बचपन इसलिए, थोड़ा चिल कर लो प्लीज, क्योंकि बचपन इसलिए, थोड़ा चिल कर लो प्लीज, क्योंकि बचपन इसलिए।
With that, we come to the close of this panel. Thank you so much.